Well, hey guys, it's MIKEFESTIVA here. Welcome back to part 2 of the Mini Pinzgauer build, the Mini Pins. In this video, we're actually going to be going over some pretty cool stuff. We're going to actually start welding up a framework, the main framework for the flatbed. We're going to actually be rebuilding the whole entire front end of this machine because it was just shot. Everything was in really bad shape. And we're going to get to actually mounting and cutting all the brackets and mounting the front rack and pinion so we can start working out the full steering with this thing. So enjoy the video, guys. Right off the bat here, we want to just do a little quick recap of part 1. Basically pulled this thing out of the bushes. It's been sitting for years. It was shot. Changed out all the 6 tires on it because all of them were flat and cracked apart. And then we actually start ripping off everything that was unnecessary for this build. So hope you guys enjoyed part 2. So here's some of the stuff I got. Here's 3 of the 4 wheel spacers for the rear wheels. Here's the front wheel spacers. Here's a bushing I built for a preload spring out of some UHMW for the front shocks. I got 2 of these. Over here we got some ball joints, some front calipers, some upper strut. Yeah, this thing has struts, it's strange. It has upper strut bushings, some new struts for it because they're blowing out. CV boots because the CV boots are completely ripped apart. Gonna be converting this thing to rack and pinion, hopefully. Actually, I have to make this build. Front wheel bearings. I ordered this thinking this is everything I need here. Turns out each wheel has 4 bearings in it and numerous seals. I actually had to order the strut bearings kit, so that's kind of something I'm waiting on. So one thing I didn't really want to do was actually change the chain and sprockets on here because there's actually 4 O-ring chains on here and 8 sprockets. To do all this work and be taking this thing a long ways from my house on back roads, especially if I'm taking my son out when he gets a little bit older, I'm not going to be able to rely on this thing. Like, most of the sprockets look pretty good. The chains were shot. The front sprocket's missing at least 1 tooth on it, and the main drive sprocket is really chewed up. So for me to really trust this thing, I had to dump another $250 into chain and sprockets. So after I removed that 250, I realized that 420cc 4-stroke is physically a lot bigger, and it's going to be next to impossible to fit between the belt and the drive chain for the jack shaft and the front 4-wheel drive. It's just too tight and compact, too many frame rails down there. So I'm going to scrap that idea of mounting it down low. What I'm going to actually start working on is running 2 of the 4 horizontal frame rails out here. They're going to get bent down from part of the cab. We're going to do some crossbars up here. The reason we're going to start on this next, after I get these bars in place, I'm going to cut out some of the framework here so I can get to the transmission easier and mount the engine. It's going to make it a lot easier to service. I'm hoping the engine's going to sit somewhere right behind the back seat a little bit. So we're going to start cutting and a bunch of tubing and start working on that next. So I'm pretty excited. This is actually going to be the first time I'm really going to use the Rogue Fab bender in one of my major projects. And after I got it, I realized I actually made square tubing dies. So I bought some for some 1-inch tubing. That's what I'm going to be mainly using on this whole frame. That's what Polaris used originally. It just seemed like it worked well with the whole build. Alright, got both the center frame rails bent. I found that I was pretty happy with the 60-degree angle. I got the spring off the strut, got it brought all the way up to a full bottom mount mode, got plenty of clearance here. These were left long so I can cut them off, same as the tail section, so I can determine how much overhang I want on the back tires. So this is one thing I want to note for you guys. The deformation's pretty bad on the 16th inch wall, and this is 3/32, and there's almost no deformation. It dips a little bit, but no wrinkles at all. The front side on both bars are really smooth, but 3/32, I bet it would bend 1/8 inch really, really nice. And the reason I went for 16th and 3/32, I'm really trying to keep the upper weight down on this thing. It's never going to have tremendous loads and weight in it. I think 600 pounds probably over the whole flatbed's all I want to haul of the thing. So the reason I'm not the least bit concerned about using 3/32 and 16th inch for the main bed and framework on here is because this stock tubing right here for the frame that runs all the way back is actually 3/32. So this thing's going to be gusseted up and built so overbuilt, even if it's with thin wall tubing, that it's going to definitely exceed all the weight limits I'm ever going to load on this thing. So it should be just fine. Look at those nice cobwebs and rust there. Alright, now that I got the frame tack welded around here, we're going to actually cut out the original section of frame in this location. This will give better access to the transmission if I have to do any work to that or work on shift linkages. And it's going to give me a nice location where I can play around with that 420cc engine and fit it to the ideal location. I really want to have it so it's easier to service. I don't want to have it buried in the frame. I think this is going to work pretty well. This is going to be kind of boring work, so I'm going to do a little time lapse here to speed us through it. Basically, I got all new hub seals and bearings, and I got some strut bushings and things like that, new calipers and some front sprockets. We're going to put all this stuff on here, do a little time lapse. We also confirmed that the actual electronic hubs still work by putting 12 volts to them. They still lock up, so that's good. We'll bring you guys back in after this time lapse to actually do some interesting stuff like installing the front rack and pinion and working on some of that. Getting into this job a little more than I really ever wanted to. I didn't realize the front end was in such bad shape on the drivetrain. So basically I was going to change out the sprockets after I realized the back main drive sprocket was really worn, and most of the power going through the rear axles go through that one sprocket. And this one's missing a tooth up here. The chains were shot, all the O-ring chains were really messed up. So I had to actually rotate this quite a bit to actually get the sprocket off. Once I was in there this far, I'm like, I've never really had to adjust the chains on here, and if this aluminum piece doesn't cam over properly in that steel housing, it's gonna be a nightmare to tighten the chains. So decided I'm gonna clean it up a little bit, slide this back together all greased up, and I'm just hoping it'll be a trouble-free vehicle for a long time. Another thing I did was I tapped out these tiny little studs out of here and replaced them with some grade 8 fine thread 3/8 to match the wheel studs out here, just because there's going to be more of a load with the wheel spacers and the rims flipped. I just wanted to have everything nice and sturdy up front. So I got the CV joint boots all replaced and repacked. I ended up getting all the bearings done up and all the seals. Kind of spent through some of that because it wasn't very fun. It's not something I really want to do. It took me 2 nights to get accomplished. But we're done with that, and we're going to start trying to figure out this rack and pinion here. Get rid of these old handlebars. So here's that little side-by-side rack and pinion here. I got the rubber bellows off the ends right now. So here's the beauty of the CNC equipment. If you can draw it precisely, it will cut it precisely. Perfect hole patterns there. Let's try mocking up this thing, get it kind of temporarily mounted so we can figure out our tie rod ends. So see those tabs we just cut, they're all welded on here in a way where it slides over the front of the frame. And it gives me a lot of flexibility for playing around with the geometry up here, because I can go in or out or up or down. and I can just clamp it into place and check the actual stroke of the tire, make sure I don't get too much bump steer. I haven't really done much with rack and pinion, so I'm kind of figuring that out. One thing I'm kind of taking into consideration is I measure the distance between the ball joint from the bottom to the steering joint. And I think I'm gonna have to keep that distance the same between the rack and the lower pivot, just so you don't get crazy steering when the suspension goes through the stroke. All right, let's get this clamped in place and start figuring out our tie rod ends. Alright, been playing around with geometry a little bit on the steering. The drawback is the steering rack from ball joint to ball joint is about 12 inches, and the original one is only about 4 inches in the center. So it's just kind of makes it a little more difficult with trying to counteract bump steer. These tie rod ends are really stubby because the steering rack is so wide. And I played around with this and I realized by putting this washer in here, it's just a nut, it actually helped with the bump steer in the normal suspension range. And I'm gonna actually replace that nut with some of these pieces of aluminum I turned on my lathe. But what happens is right now I'm pretty minimal for bump steer in the normal suspension range. When this goes from this angle to up, it's minimal. When it drops massively for fully lifted and then fully compressed, the bump steer becomes a little more drastic. But normal operation should be between this angle and a little bit up. Probably be okay. Alright, because those A-arms on front of that Polaris are just so spindly and we're going to be putting a lot of extra weight, we're actually going to cut some A-arm braces. I drew them up here on the Fusion 360. We're just going to fill in the A-arms with some 1/8 inch, and we're going to actually add some little shock mounts to it. Probably run a secondary set of shocks up there just to keep the front end from bouncing so much. I'm going to cut those out next. There you go, 2 A-arm supports. Now I just got to chip a little bit of slag off the backside and we can start tack welding his on there. So this little thing here, I'm not sure how 90% of my subscribers missed watching this video, but I built this little electromagnetic grinding station for super cheap. I'll put a little link up here for the video, and it just worked really well. Turn it on and it's locked on here. Works pretty good. Now for the moment of truth, we'll see how this thing fits. Looks like it lines up perfect. It had some really strange angles on this A-arm here, and looks like it fits great. For all the MIG welding on this entire build series here, I'm going to be using the Yes welder. It's the MIG 205DS, and that's actually a pretty good little welder, especially for the price. It's a multi-process, so it's a MIG, stick, and DC TIG. If you guys are interested in a little review I did, I'll put a link up here. Let's get welding. Okay, as much as I want to really get the engine installed in this, I'm partway through that process of the video, and there's a lot more I have to do, so I'm going to save that for the next build video, part 3. But I want to show you guys a little bit. I'm also hoping to get not only the engine installed, some other mods, but also try to get the steering hooked up. I got a Polaris, I think ZRZ800. That's what actually I bought the rack and pinion from. And I found a used steering column with some stuck U-joints that got freed up. And I found a little collapsible steering column from like an F-150. Got a cheap little eBay steering wheel and wheel adapter, so should actually work out pretty good. I also got a little 3-way gearbox that should be completely adequate to handle the steering going down and turning 90 degrees, because the steering shaft has to come down and behind me to steer the rack and pinion. Now I want to give a little shout out to another YouTube channel I really like. It's called Oliver Motorized. I'm going to put a link below. You guys check that out. Consider leaving a comment and subscribing to his channel. He's actually kind of in the Northwest. He's just in Oregon, so I'm up in Washington. But he's a goofy guy. I really like his character. He does really fun builds. He has a lot of fun. He doesn't always take the easiest approach to building something. He likes a challenge and he does things in a unique way. And like I said, he's a goofy guy. He always likes to throw a few bloopers in there and some funny... Come on, Arlo, do you have to be chewing on that stick right now when I'm doing this? He does always throw some pretty funny bloopers into the videos. Just has a good time with the YouTube channel. So if you guys get a chance, check that out. Alright, if you can hear some crunching, that's my dog chewing on a stick next to me. Alright, you guys, until next time, take care. Goodbye.